Welcome to another episode of Relentlessly Resilient, where real people share their real-life experiences about the trials and challenges they've faced and the tools they've developed to help them still live their best lives. I'm Jennie Taylor.
And I'm Michelle Scharf. Today we have one of my friends. We probably didn't start out as friends, more like probably political. Actually, the first time I met you, Timothy,
we weren't enemies.
No, we weren't enemies.
I was wondering where this was going. Like, okay, wait a second.
We weren't enemies, but the first time I met you, you were running for Dan Lillenquist's seat, and he was going to be running against Senator Hatch, and I was working on that Hatch campaign. And I remember the first time I was introduced to you from somebody else. I don't know if you know this. Heather Groom actually told me, oh, this is my friend Timothy, and this is how I know him, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, man, I'm going to like this guy. And I remember, I felt like in some way that you were going to be very supportive of Dan Lillenquist in his run, and I couldn't like you.
Well, I'll try to forgive you for backing Senator Hatch for his, 18th term, I think it was.
I know. I get it all the time. Here's the thing.
When did this show become so political, people?
I don't know. Michelle just took it there, just for the record.
She totally took it there.
I thought it was hilarious. Anyway, that seems like another life to me now. I've been through so much myself. I'm just another person in a different space and time, but I look back at those days and sometimes I just have to laugh at myself. But you are a House of Representatives. You actually did lose that race for that Senate seat, but you went on to win a House of Representatives seat, 18th. What is that, Centerville? What's your district?
Yeah, Centerville, Farmington, a little bit of West Bountiful and Kaysville. So
yeah. Oh, wow. You reached up into my area. I didn't realize it came up that far.
Yep, awfully close to Brad Wilson, where Brad Wilson lives over in West Kaysville.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so, and I have to say, you're actually a really good representative for your district, and you do a good job up there.
Well, thanks. Thanks for saying that. I appreciate that.
I remember you and I were talking, and we were at a Christmas event at somebody's house, kind of a political event. And I was struggling with a child that was dealing with some mental health issues. And you had mentioned to me this story about your family. And I've always wanted to really be able to find some time to really understand and hear the fullness of the story, because it was just basically a highlight that you had a sibling with mental illness and what that resulted in for your family. And I was so struck by it, but I really didn't know how to come back around and say, hey, can I take you to lunch? Because I want to pry into your personal life and hear the rest of the story. I'm excited that I'm doing this podcast, and actually you reached out to me, and I can't be more honored to have you talk about this and share your story with us. I'm really touched that you trust me enough and that you decided to do this with us today. So why don't I turn it over to you, and you can tell us about you and your story.
Well, thanks, Michelle, and thanks, Jennie. And let me just say, I did jump at the opportunity to come on. I'm honored to be on the show. And I wanted to say thanks to both of you for teeing up these really important conversations. I remarked to my wife not long ago that one way to think about life is a series of hellos followed by a series of goodbyes. And that sounds really depressing, but what I think it highlights is that loss is just a part of what it means to be human. And sometimes those losses come unexpectedly, and that tends to, it can be shattering at times. But I love that the two of you have taken up the laboring or really to have these conversations and to communicate to people that are going through loss and tragedy and grief that, hey, even though some wounds will never fully heal, there is life beyond, that you can get through this and you will get through this. So I think it's an important conversation, and I'm happy to be on and share a little bit of my story, which it goes back quite some time. It's amazing to me believe, but it's almost been 20 years since we lost my mother. And it's a poignant time of year for me because it's the Christmas season. That was her favorite time of year. She absolutely loved Christmas. And I want to get emotional just talking about it, but
that's okay. We tend to cry and laugh on this.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a crying guy, so you might get a dose of that.
Kind of every day of my life.
We were at my sister's yesterday and just singing Christmas carols, food, family, the kind of music that my mother loved. That was just really poignant for me because that's a time of year that I really feel close to her and remember her. So my mother is one of those kind of people, there are people and there are people. She just was this incredible personality, a very rich, deep, wise, kind of loving person that touched everybody that she came in contact with profoundly and in positive ways. And it's impossible to kind of fully describe who she was. But I took some of her writings and I threw them on a blog. I haven't really updated it much lately, but it's called Lessons My Mother Taught Me. And one of the ways to talk about her is maybe just a little blip that I put at the top of that blog. It's just lessons my mother taught me.blogspot.com. But what I said about my mother in trying to just summarize just a little bit about her is a gifted writer with a keen intellect, an endless curiosity, and a deep love of people. Mom could have been anything. She chose to be a mother. She raised 8 children and touched the lives of many others, often in simple ways: a telephone call, a shoulder to cry on, a loaf of homemade bread. So that little blip, it just kind of, encapsulates a little bit of what my mom was about. She was Utah, for the most part, born and raised. She was born in Salt Lake City, lived a little bit in San Bernardino, California, then back to Salt Lake, and then her teenage years in Bountiful, Utah, where my grandparents lived for many, many years. She went to BYU. And in her family, I think she was just anxious to get an education and was sort of, they were a family where like the boys had education funds and the girls didn't because they weren't expected to go to school, but she really wanted to get an education and she went and got a degree in English. She was awfully close to getting a master's degree in English when she started having kids, and the family just sort of precluded her finishing that degree. She was an incredible sort of writer and secretary. She knew shorthand. She could type something insane, like 120 words a minute on those old manual typewriters. She served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints back when it was unusual for sister missionaries to go out. But that was something that she really felt strongly about and wanted to do. She was called to the Southern Far East Asia Mission, where she served in Hong Kong for 6 months as the mission secretary, and then was transferred to the Philippines, where she was one of the first 4 sister missionaries into the Philippines, and she spent another 18 months there. So she had a 2-year mission in the early 60s.
Wow, that is remarkable for that time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What's your mom's name?
Just quite an extraordinary person, and one of her real legacies is that she was such a writer. So we're gifted with an incredible legacy of just, letters home, journals, things that she kept over time. And that's really what we have left to kind of hold on to it means a lot to us now, basically, to have that.
Yeah.
So
tell us your mom's name.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. MaryJane Davidson Hawkes was her name. And
can you say that again? I think that we had a little glitch on the audio.
Sure. MaryJane Davidson was her maiden name, and then she married my dad. And she met my dad later. So my mom always envisioned having a big family. She got married at 27.
Oh, wow.
And then they immediately started having kids. She had 7 kids in 10 years.
Bless her soul.
Wow.
And I was just thinking about that. I was thinking about this podcast, and it wasn't like they were all like easy children. My older brother, and I think he'd own this title, was hell on wheels from the get-go. And number 4 had Down syndromes. Number 5 is my brother that we'll talk about, that struggled with mental illness. I think even from the time he was quite young was quite you could tell that he was struggling with some things. And even as she did this and raised 8 kids, she was just always into different things. She was studying Spanish. She was learning to toll paint. She was sponsoring refugees' families. She was just into everything. It was just go, go, go all the time. All just constructive, good stuff. Gardening. Just did so many different things that she loved. I like to say that she was never bored, because she really wasn't.
Because she never sat still.
Right.
You get bored if you don't sit
Yeah,
still.
she couldn't, with those kids, she couldn't have sat still, but she just was really quite a remarkable person. I think about one of the things that was really poignant for me is my kids. So we had, my first two kids were born when she was still alive. And like when my son would go up and hang out with her, she was always busy in the garden. So she just got him a little wheelbarrow. And so he could just follow her around, putter around the yard, with her doing the gardening.
Oh, that's so sweet.
That's
a good grandma. That's a good grandma.
Yeah.
So
anyway, that's kind of a flavor of who she was. She was a remarkable person.
Yeah, she sounds like a lovely woman, a great mother, a great matriarch. Really interesting, kind of a trailblazer in a lot of ways for her time. Serving a mission in the 60s, especially a 2-year mission for a young woman at that time is not very common.
Yeah.
And then having a degree as well. And the fact that she actually got married a little bit late in life for, a typical Mormon Utah.
Yes, for that era, right?
Yes. I mean, that's really, I'm like 27, like she was a spinster by then in 1960s, mentality. And that's really amazing. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, you're going to share with us some real challenging life situations that probably nobody saw this coming. We're going to take a break and we'll be right back. We're back with Timothy Hawkes, and he has shared with us a beautiful story about his mother, MaryJane Davidson Hawkes, and beautiful thoughts that he has written about her, the inspiration that she has given to him, and the lessons she helped instill and teach him in his life, and as well as the connections that she was able to forge with her family and friends and her community, as she was a worker and it sounds like she was a diligent volunteer service-oriented woman. Is that right?
Absolutely. All the time.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. I mean, those are the kind of people we need in the world. And I can see how you came to be where you're at. You've taken part of that as well. You serve us up in the state capitol. You volunteer your time to do that, and you're continuing that legacy. That's beautiful. Timothy, tell us. You've shared with us this beautiful story about who your mom was. What happened to your mom?
Yeah, so my mother's story, you can't really tell my mother's story without telling the story a little bit about my younger brother, Ben. And he was just a deeply sensitive kid when, from the time that he was just really, really small. I don't think anybody thought he had anything seriously wrong with him. He was just a real quiet, sweet, sensitive kid, loved animals. He was that kind of kid. I remember kind of he's about 4 years younger than I was. But a real dramatic change in Ben when I left to serve an LDS mission of my own to Japan. Before I left, he was my little buddy. He needed somebody to hang out with, and so I remember little fishing trips, and we kind of had a tradition. We'd go to the local convenience store, and we'd get a Pepsi and a Caramello candy bar, and that was just kind of our little gig. And when I came back from my mission, Ben was a completely different kid. He'd gone through puberty and I think was starting to deal with depression on a serious level, and had unfortunately already started getting involved in substance abuse, alcohol, marijuana particularly. And so he was just he was a different person, and he was a lot more troubled. And I think, and there's quite a story of, I think, my parents trying to grapple with that. And how do you deal with a child who's dealing with mental illness? How do you deal with a child who's struggling with substance abuse? How do you maintain sort of rules in your home and your standards, even as you show love and support for them? And that was just kind of an ongoing struggle. And Ben just waxed in and out, times where he seemed to be doing a lot better, and then times when he really, really seemed to be struggling. But Ben always, nobody ever questioned, Ben always had a really good heart. there came a time when we started to think he was a mean drunk. And my parents actually got to a point where they were just so concerned about him. They actually let him come back home, and they would let him, he would go out back and drink, or if he wanted to smoke a cigarette, he would go out and smoke on the back porch. And they kind of weren't super comfortable with it, but they didn't really know what else to do. And they really knew that he needed a place to stay. Anyway, people thought that he was a mean drunk. And in retrospect, a lot of this stuff becomes clear in retrospect. Ben was struggling with serious mental illness. He was probably better when he was drunk, because it was in a weird way medicating kind of what he was doing. And it was when he was stone cold sober that you really started to see the mental illness come. He did have a break at one point and was admitted to a treatment program, really for risk of suicide. He was throwing stuff out the window. Everybody thought he was at risk to himself. He went into that program and he broke program rules by drinking. And so ironically, it kicked him out of the program. So he didn't have access to care in the way that he probably needed. And so this went on for a few years and really came to a head in February of 2001. And I remember pretty well the litany of how this happened. But, late in the week, I think it was a Thursday or Friday, my mom called me, and my brother was struggling. He knew that he was heading into kind of a psychotic episode of one sort or another. He knew that something was wrong and he was having trouble. So he called her for help. And at that point, he wasn't living at home. And I don't think my parents would have been comfortable having him there. And so my mother and I both tag teamed, and we just called around trying to find anywhere that would take him. And I was working at a big law firm at the time, but I remember taking like an hour out of my day and calling around and texting, not texting at that point, but looking around to see if there was anywhere we could get him. It was all 3 weeks out, 4 weeks out before they could even potentially get him in. And my mother was really frustrated about that. And I was frustrated. I remember being frustrated by that. On Saturday, he called my father, and he was in a really bad place. And so my father took him into the local emergency room. And there were some unfortunate things that happened there. They didn't look up his mental health history. They didn't realize that he'd been checked in for an episode before. And so they prescribed a medication that probably made things worse. And then sort of fast forward to Sunday, we were planning on going up and spending Sunday dinner with my parents, which was kind of what we did. We lived about 30 minutes south in the DC suburbs. And so we were headed up to, we were planning on going up to spend time with my mom. And at the time, my mom was fixing dinner, and my sister Katie was still at home. My sister Jenny was on a mission. And then there were two other people at home. And these were just, young girls, teenage girls. My mom she was like a hen that gathers the chickens under the wing. So when there's people that just don't quite fit or need a place to stay, our home was always open. And so there were two girls there. My dad was running late with some church meetings and was stuck over at the church. And we were late getting up there. And when we got to the top of the street, there was police tape at the top of the street. And one of the neighbors kind of flagged me and said, "Hey, Tim, you need to come with me." And I remember walking down the street, and our concern again was about Ben. She said it was something about Ben. And then I remember just having the impression of wanting to say, I didn't say anything, but how's my mom? And when I got to the bottom of the street, my dad was at the neighbor's house, and he said, "Tim, Ben's killed mom." Ugh. And so what had happened is that my brother, who had been staying with a friend, he'd walked 3 miles in the cold, dressed in this outlandish outfit. He doesn't remember any of this kind of detail. He doesn't remember anything about that day whatsoever. But he walked into the house, and the folks that were there, including my sister Katie, just said he just had a real blank look on his expression. He walked right into the kitchen, and he opened one of the drawers and picked up a kitchen knife. My mother said to my sister Katie, "Go call 911." And Katie ran next door to call 911. And there was one of these little girls was there downstairs, and she heard my mother's last words, and my mother's final words were, "All I've ever given you is love." So Nothing can prepare you for something like that happens. I mean, I remember it just feeling like a bomb went off and just feeling numb. You just can't fully process something like that. But it's been interesting with time and experience, because I think at the end of the day, a loss is a loss, and that's where I feel a commonality with other people that have had the unexpected loss of somebody that's really near and dear to them.
Well, it's so complicated, though, because, and that's the thing with grief, a loss is a loss is a loss, but there are things that complicate grief. And I would imagine that having your brother, who you clearly love, be the one to take your mom away from you has got to be one of the most difficult thing for your own brain to compartmentalize, to store that, to understand it in any possible way.
Well, it was really it's probably a triple tragedy. There was one of the young girls that was there. My brother murdered her as well. It was just one of these kind of crazy things. There was the one girl he just treated like she wasn't even there. He told my sister Katie when she came back to just leave. So he's reacting to people in different ways. But so it was a double homicide. But in many ways, it was almost a triple, in the sense that the most tragic player in this whole thing is my brother Ben. He has to live with the reality of what he did. He doesn't remember it. I don't think he's culpable for it. He wasn't found culpable by the state, but, he has to deal with that. And so I think, in a very real sense, we've had to deal with losing my brother Ben in terms of him being able to live a happy, healthy, productive life. And that's been a profound tragedy for him and for all of us.
Right. It is such an unreal story. I mean, we see a lot of crazy stories play out on movies or television or whatever, and we a lot of times think that that's so far-fetched or whatever. But I mean, this is real life. This happened to your family, and now you have to figure out how do you pick up and move forward, losing, really, like you said, you've lost your brother, but your brother, responsible by the law or not, is responsible for taking out two people, and one is your very own mother. I think in any tragedy, if it's not sort of a real act of God type thing, it does leave us grappling with the what ifs, and that's always been the challenge. Like, what if we could have got Ben into a center? What if they hadn't given him the wrong medication? What if we'd recognized that he was a risk to others before we did? Right. Or what if your dad got home early?
Yeah,
would your dad have been gone? What if you guys got there? And what if he
Sure.
wasn't indifferent to you and your family? I mean, really, there's a lot of crazy scenarios that, look at my grief rattling mind go.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
It's
and that's part of the struggle, right? And I think a lot of us go through that in situations like this. You look back and you're like, okay, I should have recognized this or that. But at the end of the day, that's not really a productive conversation to have, other than to share with others.
Yeah, Timothy, you bring up something that's so important in this conversation about mental wellness. Probably everybody listening to this podcast knows someone who's struggling with their own mental health, either right now because of the pandemic, or maybe they have for years, maybe they have their whole life. I've mentioned before on air and off that I have siblings in both my family and my husband's that have struggled with suicidal ideation, with suicidal episodes, with drug and alcohol. And as I know what that feels like to be worried for that person, and to get a phone call and you think, oh my gosh, what's happened to that person? But like you said, to not have recognized, not only could he have been a threat to himself, but a threat to the rest of you and to your family. That, like Michelle said, brings a whole new layer of complexity, where maybe if someone had called you that day, or if your dad had pulled you aside as you arrived at the home and said, hey, Ben's hurt himself, or something's happened to Ben, you might have still been heartbroken and still, of course, been sick to your stomach, but maybe not been as shocked as to have it happen in this way. I just don't have words to express my sympathy for your family, for Katie, for being there in the home, for your poor father, for all of you. I'd love to hear what the journey of this past almost 20 years has been like, because like Michelle said, this sounds like the horrible script of a movie I would never pay money to go see. So I think we're going to take a quick break and come back and hear from you, your perspective, what you've been able to do, what's worked, what hasn't, how you've gotten to where you are this many years removed, and yet we can still feel the emotion in your voice as if it happened yesterday. And I think that's an important thing to point out when we go through trials. Yes, we try to pick up the pieces. Yes, we're optimistic. Yes, we try to find purpose in our pain. And yes, we can still live meaningful lives. That pain is still there. That tragedy is still tragic. So we'll take a quick break and come back. And just thank you, Timothy, for sharing this with us and being willing to open up on such a personal, heartbreaking story. We'll be right back. All right, we are back with Timothy Hawkes, who is sharing with us the tragic story of how his younger brother's mental illness led to the murder of his mother and another young girl who was in the home. It's been nearly 20 years, Timothy. Can you tell us maybe some of the immediate aftermath and the journey that's taken you? Obviously, we could spend days talking about 2 decades worth of this journey, but what can you share with us? What have you found that's helped you or built within you that resilience and that determination to still have a meaningful, productive life, to not give into the darkness that could be so understandable with a story like this? Sure.
Well, I think there's a lot of things, and some are particularized to our situation. Some I think are more general. But I remember in this, I thought I might share this one thing, which is I can remember, and this was quite some time after my mother's death. It was weeks, it might have been months, but I was, because I'm an attorney and because I was interested in the details, I had sat through a lot of the hearings that my brother, so this had to have been months after some of the legal proceedings that my brother had been involved in. And that exposed me, of course, to a lot of details, really disturbing details about my mother's death. And I remember one night I just couldn't sleep because I just had all this stuff going through my head. And I had an impression come over me where it was almost, it wasn't my mom's voice, but it's almost my mom's voice just saying, it's okay, Tim. It's all okay. And that was a real comfort to me to know that I felt like, from her perspective, it didn't really matter how my mama died. All that sort of detail really just didn't matter so much. And it just helped speak some peace to my soul. I think in terms of the things, a big picture that helped us, one is, my mother had invested in this amazing social network. She had so many friends. She touched so many people for good. And of course, that social network was there for her family when she died. And so we had a dear friend open her home to us and made sure that we didn't have to make, both of you have been through real tragedies in your life, but, you don't, when you're dealing with that kind of grief, you don't want to worry about what's for lunch. And so I really appreciate this sweet friend of ours that just opened her home up, and meals would come in at regular times and just let us as a family kind of decompress and talk to each other and try to make sense of it. And that was huge because we can go back home. I mean, that was out of the question. And so I think that network of family and friends was so important, and faith was important. And ultimately my mom's own words were really important. Just 2 years prior to her own death, she dealt with my grandmother's death from stomach cancer. And my mother had the privilege, she would have definitely seen it as a privilege, to go and spend the last 2 to 3 weeks with my grandmother as she was dying. And she wrote in her journal a little bit about that. And if it's okay, I think I might just read just a few paragraphs from one of my mom's letters home. When my mom was writing this, she wasn't thinking, I don't think she couldn't have known that she was writing words that would ultimately comfort her own children. But that's what the effect was of her documenting this and putting in a letter home. But so this is a letter dated March 24th, 1999. She says, I gave Mama's little skeleton a back rub just before bed one night. And when I knelt for my prayer, the contours of her wasted body seemed to be still under my hands. I was heartbroken and searching for comfort. I thank the Lord for the atonement. I've studied it so many times, but I don't remember ever wanting it to be more of a reality, more than I did as I thought about Mama's precious body wasting away just a few feet from me. As I prayed those words of gratitude, I was enveloped in that feeling best described as flames of fire. A delicious warmth filled every part of my being. I felt enveloped and engulfed in flames. They lingered, but not long enough for me. I would have liked to have kept that feeling with me. Later, after the ordeal of my mother's physical death, the cold questions crept into my mind. What if it's all just a story? What if this death is really all there is? What if all that was my mother had come to a final end? What a leaden, miserable feeling it was. Thankfully, it was brief. In retrospect, those two strong memories make an easy choice for me. I know which of them to believe. One of them is death, the other is life. One is cold, the other is warm. One is false, the other is true. I believe in the atonement, I believe in the resurrection, I believe in eternal life, and I thank the Lord that I've been so sweetly and personally comforted. May the Lord help me keep that truth and comfort in my life. And so that, words like that from my mom's own journals and writing, I think became an immense source of strength and comfort for her children. We tried to grapple with really what is an unspeakable tragedy.
So beautiful. I really appreciate you sharing this story with us. I mean, and clearly your mom loved the Savior. She had a strong testimony, and it's really a gift to your family that she took the time to write them and that you have those writings, that she was diligent in her journaling. Such a beautiful story. We meet people all of the time, and I started this out kind of a little bit political, but I have to turn it back around that for a minute. Part of the reason I started this podcast and I had the inspiration for it was because I've spent so much time on so many campaigns, and I've really gotten to know people who are involved in the party process, and in getting to know people across this state. I've met some really treasured people, and you get to know them. And when you really choose to get to know people, especially when it's in politics, and you open up and you share some really hard stories or hard lessons of life, it's these stories that made the difference for me while I was struggling. When you let me know that you had dealt with somebody in your family with mental illness and that it's hard to deal with. And I knew that if you could get through this thing, and you had told me that, my brother had killed my mother, I thought, I'm not dealing with that kind of big problem. I can find the help that my daughter needs, and I can get the help that my children need. It's these relationships and connections that we make. And, politics, and especially this past year, has gotten so divisive and such kind of a bad rap. But really, politics is really the art of connecting with other people and being able to resolve conflicts and issues and problems. And that's part of what you do up there on the Hill, right?
Sure. No, I think that, the risk in politics, right, is that it's just the superficial. Political narratives and political campaigns are really about storytelling, and it all sometimes seems superficial. But I think those of us that are engaged in the public process and that understand it, and it is sort of a recognition. I think we run for office thinking it's just a bunch of those up there, and I'm going to go up there and fix it. And you get up there and you realize that you're surrounded by people of flesh and blood who have real life experiences. Yeah. And even when we don't see eye to eye in terms of how to get there, mostly, they're just up there people that are trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when I've shared with people that I'm a lobbyist, they're like, oh, and I'm like, oh, don't worry. I'm not one of those terrible ones. I work to support children, at the time I was working on a good cause. People would say, oh, what are they really like? And, one of my favorite things to say is they're real people just like you and me. And some of them have had some real heartbreak, and sure. they're really up there trying to do their very best.
Well, and honestly, sometimes you don't know until you share stories like this one. And then people are like, oh my gosh,
I'm sure some of your peers will be surprised. I'm sure not everybody knows the story.
It's not something you share in casual conversations.
Right.
But Timothy, I appreciate your sharing it with us, because I'm thinking, I was married to a politician, and I know the bad word that the feeling that can connote to a lot of people, like Michelle just said, and yet I choose to view him as a statesman and someone who really was genuinely trying to help through the political process that does involve policies and things where we get these words. But I would imagine this experience, along with the wealth of other experiences you have had in your life, make you a more effective lawmaker. They make you a more effective listener, negotiator. I'm thinking particularly right now here in the state of Utah, we are known for not having the best mental health. We are known for our very high suicide numbers. We are known for our opioid epidemic problems. A lot of these things that have overlap with your story and your brother's experience and your family's trial and tragedy can now help you be that much more effective up on the hill as you're having conversations. And it's not just, I saw some statistics about mental health, or I saw some charts that showed how many people struggle with drugs and alcohol as a form of self-medication. But you've lived that and have the insider's view that I would think would help make you invaluable in helping to make some of those policies. Again, we all know someone or lots of someones who struggle with their mental health, and we know how frustrating it can be when sometimes the system seems to work against what they need, and we can't get them into treatment, or they get kicked out of treatment because of the very thing they're struggling and need help with. And I would love to know, Timothy, how you're almost 20 years into this. How have you commemorated your mother's life and death over the years? How have you helped her be a part of your children's life? You mentioned that 2 of your children were born when she was still alive, but the rest were not. Can you share just a few things of what you've done to kind of make her still a present part? I know you shared the writings, but maybe what does that look like in some of your traditions or some of your interactions with your father, with the rest of your siblings? How do you kind of carry that on in a way that is positive and uplifting and not just feels like, oh my gosh, mom's gone?
Yeah. Well, thanks for that question. I might speak just briefly to the political piece. It's just interesting how politics goes. And I haven't been like a champion on the forefront of mental illness, maybe because I just don't know, like my brother's situation is so tough to know what would have made a difference, because he's the 1 in a million, right? You can't really design a mental health system for him, but you'd hope that there's some emergency care. And I've certainly supported those kinds of things. One of the things that it does color, though, from a policy standpoint for me is the marijuana debate. My brother's diagnosis is drug-induced schizophrenia. He is one of the sad cases. There's a big body of research out there that if you start using pot when you're a teenager and intensively, it can create psychotic breaks. And unfortunately, that's what happened in his case. And so that's really made me very cautious on this rush to sort of legalize marijuana across the board, because there are costs, and sometimes those costs are catastrophic. In terms of your question about traditions, I really appreciate that one. That's one that I think we all struggle with, and people respond to grief in such different ways. I know people that have dealt with really unspeakable tragedies, and their way of doing it is just to not think about it. And I can't speak to whether that's healthy for them or not, but they're just sort of pushing it out of sight, out of mind. And my family's not really that way. And we want to celebrate my mother's life and remember things about her. She's buried in Bountiful. And one of the things we do on Christmas Eve is we go hold hands, and we sing carols around her grave and put a candle on the grave. And, cemeteries are such cold, kind of dark places, particularly this time of year. And that's our little way of kind of bringing a little bit of light back in there and remembering her. And she loved carols so much that that's a natural thing for us to do. One that's that we found just so great lately, and I just love, is when we saw the Disney movie Coco, I became enamored of Day of the Dead celebrations in Mexico, and understanding them, because I think, Halloween is such a macabre kind of dark sort of, it ranges from the silly to the dark and depressing. And then you look at Day of the Dead, and it's this beautiful celebration of people who've gone on. And so for the past, I think about 3 years, we've created an ofrenda in our house.
I love this story. I do this.
I love Coco. I feel like Pixar Disney has nailed it with Coco and Frozen 2. I'm just going to throw that one out there. Coco, not so much Frozen 1. That was a little bit out there. That's fine. But Coco and Frozen 2 in terms of grief, in terms of being connected to loved ones that you've lost, this concept of a life that lives on as long as you remember them.
Did you notice the miracles when they came to film for this podcast? Did you realize that there are some miracles around John's urn? So we have a permanent ofrenda in our house, and then around the Day of the Dead, we actually pull it out and do the skulls, the candy, the food, the whole thing.
Yeah. So that's what we do on Day of the Dead. We bring family together. We invite extended family to come over. We try to stack the ofrenda with all of the people, the parents and grandparents that my kids don't know. My oldest kids only dimly remember my mother. And then we have food that they would like, that they would have loved. And we sing and we share stories and we talk about those people that are up there, these unknown people. And I feel so keenly, both that people want to be remembered in a kind of a weird sort of way. They want us to remember them, but also that we need to remember them. And that's how their influence can really continue to stay with us and to bless our lives. And so that's just been such a blessing for us to do that. And my kids look forward to it. We do it after Halloween. We do it on the traditional Day of the Dead. And it's just really a great tradition that really helped our family.
I love that. I love it so much. In fact, when John was dying, my 4-year-old grandson, he was 4 at the time that John died. He climbed up in bed and they had already told him Papa's gone. And he climbed up in bed. He's 4 years old. We'd been watching Coco with him, preparing him for this loss. And he climbed up and he reached out across my husband's hand and sang that song from Coco, Remember Me.
Remember Me.
And so we all lost it. Yeah. And that little 4-year-old sang the whole song. It was the most beautiful, surreal moment. Yeah. Like, you couldn't have planned for that. It was just so natural. And they were so connected. It was such a beautiful thing. So I love that you do that. I love knowing that we have this connection, that I also have on a friend and honor. I'm going to add to it. I really have been doing it for my husband and because my grandson is the one that really drives that. But I think I want to expand this in the way that you've explained it.
Yeah.
I love that.
Timothy, thank you so much again for sharing this with us, for opening a part of your heart that even though the story took place almost 20 years ago, it is still an ever-present experience. We're grateful that you would be so real with us and raw in sharing some of those details. And we're also grateful that you reached out with kind of the intent of helping to share resilience, to say, hey, look, this has happened and we can somehow find a way to live meaningful lives, productive lives, not that we just brush it under the rug, but that we carry these memories with us. I know for me, in a couple of years that have passed since I've lost my husband, I have felt closer to other family members that I have lost. I think I've been more aware. I've been more mindful of my grandmother's journals or the character traits that maybe I inherited from, an ancestor that in the past I might have just been so myopically focused on the here and the now. That I think that is one of the blessings that comes with losing people we love, especially what we would say prematurely, is it opens our minds to the idea that I can't really say they're gone because I can't let them be gone. And so we look for the ways to feel connected. And I find that when I look for those connections, I find them. I find that they are very present. Like you said, they want to be remembered. I believe they want to help us and guide us and influence us. I'm grateful that you have those beautiful writings of your mother's. Would you tell us again the blog where you've shared some of those? I think that might be something very meaningful for many of our listeners.
Well, sure. It lessons my mother taught me. No spaces or dots, just it's the whole big lessons my mother taught me. .blogspot.com. It's just a random mix of her writings, but she was a wise person, so I think she's got a lot of meaningful things to say.
Anyway, look forward to going and reading that. In fact, I actually already wrote it down. I'm anxious to get home today and pull that up. Thank you so much for opening your heart, for reaching out to me, Timothy. I've always appreciated you. I know we haven't always gotten along or seen eye to eye on certain things, but I have always appreciated you. And one thing I really appreciate about you is I see a depth in you that I don't see in necessarily a lot of other people, but I can see that depth in you, and I appreciate your willingness and ability to be vulnerable and share your story.
Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Michelle. I really appreciate it. And I think, again, these conversations are just so valuable for people. We all process in different ways, but hopefully by sharing, we can give some people tools to help cope and some hope, really, that the future can still be a bright one.
Right. And that's exactly what we're hoping with this podcast. We're hoping that more people like you might hear something and say, hey, I have a story to share. I have an experience that I've gone through. We would encourage any of our listeners who do either have a personal experience to share or know someone who has an experience that might be of value to our listening audience. So please reach out to us. Please get in touch with me or Michelle if you know us, or you can find us on Facebook at Relentlessly Resilient, or you can send us an email at rrpodcast@ksl.com. We look forward to hearing from you. We appreciate your listening to us and hope you'll subscribe to the podcast, leave us a rating and a review, tell your friends about it so we can have the opportunity again to connect on this human level, see beyond the surface of, hi, how are you, with all these people in our lives, and really get to the heart of the experiences that have made people who they are and what they've gone through. We're grateful for you for joining us today. And remember, no matter what you do, be sure to be kind. You have no idea what people are going through in their lives. Thanks and take care.
Bye.